We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here today. Welcome. Welcome to our very first virtual Coffee with a Curator program of the semester. For those of you who are frequent attendees, thank you so much for coming today and resuming. I miss you guys over the summer. And for those, if it's your first time, again, thank you so much for making some space in your day for this. It's going to be a wonderful program. We like to call this a hashtag rare community, which is made up by a few public relations students, made that up for me a few semesters ago. This is a warm and inviting place where bibliophiles can discuss sundry topics related to rare books and book collecting. So this is a monthly program, so I hope that you enjoy your time today and that you will come back and join us in the following months. So for those of you who made it today, you're probably very excited to speak with Allie Alvis, and she's excited to speak with us today. Yay, Allie. But before we get into that, we have a tradition, and it's called Where's Andrew? Andrew, can you raise your hand? There's Andrew. So every program, Andrew changes his background to a bookish place. Usually it has to do with the topic that we're talking about for the day. And we have to guess where's Andrew. And sometimes he gives us some clues, sometimes not. So we'll see. Andrew, are there any clues that you want to give us about today's location?
Well, it looks like I'm in a nice big train station. It is in fact a library. This one, the first of the ones this semester, was actually suggested by Lori, so I have to give her a great deal of credit there.
Oh, yay, Lori. Wonderful. Okay. Sometimes you help us, kind of like narrow down the geographic region. Do you want to do that today?
It is in the U.S.
It's in the U.S.?
That's narrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are definitely on land. That's the good news.
Okay.
So we voted out like 25% of the earth there, so.
Thanks, Andrew.
My first thought was train station, and yeah.
It definitely has that look to it, but it is in fact a library.
It is a library. So we try to go as far as we can without Googling. Is it in I don't know. Is it in the Northeast?
No, it is not.
Okay.
It's so pretty.
Is it, let's just narrow down regions of the country. Is it in the South?
No.
Is it in the Midwest?
It is in the Midwest. Yeah.
Okay.
Ah.
So we're in the Midwest.
Is it in Kansas?
It is not.
Okay. Is it in Ohio?
It is.
Oh.
Oh, is it part of a university?
It is not.
Okay. Is it like a government building?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Is it like the Library of the Natural History Museum in Ohio or something like that?
It's not.
It's not. Is it like?
You got some little dealing off.
What'd you say, Yvonne?
No, I'm talking to my dog.
Oh. Okay.
Is it
like a I don't know. Well, actually, I don't know.
Is it associated with a museum of any sort?
It is actually not.
Huh.
Okay.
Is it like governmental records?
No.
Because I was.
It is a government building.
It's a government building. I was like, okay. Well, if anyone has any last guesses before Andrew has to tell us. Is it in Columbus, Ohio? No. Okay.
I'm Googling furiously, Joellen.
Maggie's always our Google person of when we're getting stuck.
And I
Is it
will
in-
say,
Is it in Cleveland, Ohio?
it is not.
Oh.
It's
I was
the
born
first,
there. I thought I'd check.
it's the first of this semester.
Huh?
Well, I said earlier, it's the first of this semester. First is the connection to the topic.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. I still don't know, but I see what you're saying with that clue. All right, Maggie, have you found it?
No, is it in Hamilton?
No,
Akron?
no.
Okay, hold on. I'm so close.
Cincinnati?
It's in I never heard of this city before, which I know doesn't help at all.
Toledo?
No,
I think you should.
you're close in the alphabet, but it's not Toledo.
I don't think we're gonna find it or
Yeah.
figure it out. I think, Andrew, you may have to tell us.
Yeah, I'm not going to find it.
This is the Brumback Library in Van Wert, Ohio. It is the very first countywide library in the world.
Wow,
Interesting.
Wow.
that's amazing. And Andrew always makes an entire handout about these locations. So that is now in the chat. Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad we would have never gotten that, but it's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Andrew, can I add this library is in a castle.
Yeah.
Really? I didn't know there were castles in Ohio.
They built a castle. So it wasn't a government building that was built as a government building. It was a structure that the government assumed care of.
Wow. So, Lori, how did you find out about this place?
Andrew, I'm trying to remember. I think I stumbled on it by accident and made some notes and put it in for Andrew's consideration. And I'm very happy that I stumped everybody. Quite frankly, I'm delighted.
Yes, that was a great one. I definitely learned something new today. Thank you so much, Andrew and Lori. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yay. That was great. Awesome. All right. Well, we will get into our program for today. I am going to first introduce our guest speaker. And so if you don't mind, we're going to do that. And then we're going to actually watch a video that I'm super excited about showing to you all. So Allie Alvis is a book historian, social media enthusiast, and communicator. You may know her as @Book Historia on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and elsewhere. She is a rare book cataloger at antiquarian book dealer Tight Punch Matrix and was previously the Special Collections Reference Librarian of the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. She has an MSc degree in book history and material culture from the University of Edinburgh and another MSc from the University of Glasgow in information management and digital preservation. Allie is passionate about talking about books. Her career priority is to make the world of rare books more accessible for anyone with any level of expertise. In her free time, she enjoys sewing, playing Magic the Gathering, and accumulating research interests into a dragon-like hoard. Welcome, Allie.
Hello. I am so excited to be here, and I'm excited to watch this video. It has been a minute since I've watched it myself. So.
Yes. Wonderful. So the way that I actually kind of got to know Allie before I even met Allie was through a video series called Bite Size Book History. And Allie, you started this during the pandemic, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is definitely a product of the pandemic when, the whole world was in lockdown, and I was just yearning for talking about books and being around physical books. And I realized that, as a researcher who has been researching books for years, I have a whole phone full of pictures of books. So I thought, I'll put that to good use. I'll teach myself video editing and make videos about all these books that I've seen. And here we are.
Wonderful. Amazing. So we're going to get a chance to see one of Allie's videos. This is a great one. It's about a 9-minute video. So just sit back and relax. And if you don't mind muting yourself so that my audio comes in clearly, I'm going to share my screen. And I think, okay, here we go. Can everyone see? Okay, awesome. I am going to turn up the volume a little bit, and we are, oh, okay. Maximize it, and here we go.
Hello, and welcome to a
We can hear? We're good? Awesome.
new episode of
Kind of quiet.
I'm your host.
Little quiet. Perfect. I will, thank you. Let me get, I never can tell how it's coming through.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Bite Size Book History. I'm your host, Allie Alvis, who you may know better as Book Historia. I'm a book historian and rare book cataloger at antiquarian book dealer Type Punch Matrix. So, friends, my dirty little secret is not so little, nor is it particularly a secret. I love yucky books. Grubby, well-loved, very good minus. There are plenty of euphemisms for books that have seen better days. But why disguise the obvious? Why not embrace the yuckiness? My love for these kinds of books isn't just for the aesthetic. There's so much book history to be learned from damaged books. In fact, you may recognize some of the things I'm about to talk about from previous episodes. Through wear and tear and love, books can tell us a lot about themselves and the people that read them. So let's go on a tour of some wonderfully awful things you might find working with rare books. Starting inside and working our way out, perhaps one of the most startling things to find in a book is a bug. Most bugs with bibliographic final resting places were simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. Snapping a book shut on an unexpected creepy crawly is definitely a reaction that has come down through the generations, but others were put there on purpose. Likely one of the oldest surviving entomological specimens was found tucked into the pages of Thomas Moffat's 1634 publication, Theater of Insects. Even vertebrates sometimes need a bibliographic end. Someone found this lizard inside a book in 2015. Now, I am not here to speculate on whether or not it would be possible to pull human DNA from these bugs and make some sort of Jurassic Park situation for 17th century readers. Because, in fact, it's not necessary. There is already enough human stuff left in the gutters of old books for scientists to use and to DNA sequence. The Folger Library's Project Dust Bunny has explored the biological information left behind by readers of the past. Using a Q-tip-like tool, scientists lifted dust out of the gutters of a 400-year-old Bible. They were able to sequence the DNA of 2 individuals, and they even found bacteria to suggest that one of these 2 people had acne. The human detritus to be found in books is not limited to the microscopic. Hair is a common find in old books, and in this Bible behind me, I have been so lucky or unlucky as to find fingernails. The Sediment of Reading project at University College London is currently studying all this stuff and more, including plant matter and wax dripped onto pages from reading by candlelight. Marginalia is a more explicit page-based clue to readers and their habits. Marginalia is a term that refers to notes taken in the margins of books and sometimes in between lines of text. For centuries, making notes in the margins as you read was a critical and encouraged part of consuming a text. Readers added cross-references to other texts, underlined and flagged passages they found important, and even wrote down personal reactions. There are also a healthy dose of doodles left behind by readers young and old. If you want a deeper dive on marginal notes, check out my episode on the topic. But who were all these people? Well, if you're lucky, you can find owner names in old books that shed a little bit of light on the identity of these readers. Some owners wrote their names on the paste downs, others directly onto the title page. And some owners actually wrote their names within the text of books. And some names have been deliberately hidden. Kate McCaffrey, now an assistant curator at Hever Castle outside of London, came across some smudges when she was researching a book of hours that once belonged to Anne Boleyn. Legend has it that Boleyn had this very book of hours on her person when she was executed by Henry VIII, and it bears a note in her hand. But the smudges were a mystery. McCaffrey used a black light and photo processing to reveal the presence of 4 heretofore unknown signatures in the margins of the manuscript, all relatives of one of Boleyn's most trusted friends. These 3 women and 1 man kept the manuscript safe during a time when any association with the executed queen could mean dire circumstances. It is thanks to their stewardship that the manuscript survives today. You can read more about McCaffrey's find in the article linked in my description below. Book plates are another way of learning who owned a book in the past. A book plate is an ownership label and is also often called an ex libris. They're usually printed and often found on the front paste down of a book. Owners from noble backgrounds often incorporated their armorial crests into their book plates, and more modern book plates often sport designs that are meaningful to their owners. In books with long histories, it's not unusual to find evidence of removed book plates, or even more than one book plate. Some owners stuck their book plates directly on top of old book plates. And taking a closer look at these can reveal hidden treasure. Book collector David L. DeLaura, who in his own words prefers grubby books, a man after my own heart, recently made one such discovery. In his copy of the 2nd edition of Sir Isaac Newton's Optics, he saw the ghost of a book plate under that of James Musgrave. The earlier hidden book plate belonged to one Charles Huggins, whose father purchased the entirety of Newton's library after his death. It turns out that DeLaura was in possession of Newton's own copy of Optics. For more information on this incredible discovery, you can check out the recent Fine Books and Collections article that I have linked in my description. Now let's see what yucky outsides can tell us about book history. Book bindings were made to protect books, so it's little wonder they often bear the brunt of damage. Loss of material on the spine may reveal interesting structural aspects, such as what the supports are made of and how they're attached to the book. It can also reveal manuscript or printed scraps that binders use to reinforce areas. These scraps, called binder's waste, were usually made of discarded books that no longer had textual value in their time. Ironically, books that went for scrap back then can be bibliographic holy grails today. Patrick Olson recently discovered one such scrap treasure in the spine of a book printed in 1490. This is a scrap of the work Ars Minor by Donatus, a book printed with the same movable type as the Gutenberg Bible. In fact, some scholars speculate that the Ars Minor was printed before the Gutenberg Bible. But we cannot know for sure. The work only survives as fragments like these. Olson's Donatus fragment is only the 2nd known example that has remained intact in the binding it was used to reinforce. Olson has written an excellent account of his discovery, which I've linked below. Damage or loss to the covers can show off their composition, like this little book from 1807 printed in America. The loss of the paper on these covers reveal that they are made out of scale board. Scale board was a cheap alternative to wooden boards or pulp boards in early America. This thinly cut wood was stiff and good in a pinch, but it was brittle, as you can see, and often didn't last very long. In addition to all this damage, there are owner repairs that can tell us a lot about a book's history. For instance, this little volume bears a cover made out of sailcloth. This is a child's school book, and the use of sailcloth implies that perhaps the child who used this book was part of a sailing community, perhaps on the seashore, and maybe their parents even worked in shipbuilding. You can see that below this cover, the book has lived a very long and exciting life. There are also many examples of, shall we say, spirited sewn spine repairs. In the trade, we call these vernacular repairs. Bookseller Garrett Scott calls these non-specialist additions to books vernacular arpeggi. He's written a manifesto about the importance of studying these aspects of books in their own right, which I've linked below. A place where many of these different kinds of yuckiness come together are books used by children, or school books. It's well known that children are not quite as careful as their adult counterparts when it comes to using books. So the bulk of my yucky book collection is actually 19th century American school books. From generations of owner names to outlandish doodles, so many doodles, to curses upon would-be book thieves. Paging through these school books is a really evocative reminder of how little reading has changed in some ways. That does it for this episode of Bite-Sized Book History. I've got a pretty healthy further reading section below, so make sure to check out all those links to find out more about the projects I called out in this episode. Also down there are links to my Etsy and my Patreon. And don't forget to like and subscribe and drop a comment below if you have any suggestions for further videos or any comments on this one. I'll see you next time, and remember, don't bite your books.
All right. I just love that video. It is so comprehensive, but also digestible. And I love it. Thank you.
It was so much fun to make. When you asked me, like, what's the favorite video that you've made? I was like, that one. It's that one.
Such a good one. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can. I'm going to drop in Book Historia YouTube channel in the chat so that you all can, if you haven't already, you can take a look at some of at Allie's wonderful videos, including the one we just saw, and they're wonderful to share with students, and my students love them. So thank you for making that. So we're going to go ahead and get into the Q&A. I know you all are waiting for that. So we'll go ahead and dive in. I have some questions that I'm going to ask Allie, and then at the very end, we can have, if you will have follow-up questions, we'll do those. All right, so Allie, first question is kind of a bipartite question. What is your earliest recollection of books, and what books did you enjoy reading as a youngster?
So hilariously, one of my earliest sort of book memories is eating them. As a toddler.
My daughter ate dust jackets.
Yeah, I ate paperbacks. I think that was my drug of choice. But once I actually started reading them, I particularly remember Ulderico's The Rainbow Goblins, which is heavily inspired by Renaissance art and the art of Hieronymus Bosch. Although I had no idea of any of that at the time. And I think it really sort of shaped my aesthetic, which is really funny. I went and bought a copy off of ABE Books because I hadn't seen one in years. And looking through it, it was like, oh, that's why I think that aesthetic is so cool. But when I got a little older, I think my favorite books to read were Tolkien, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, and Tamora Pierce's Alana series.
Interesting. Okay. So considering all of that background and some of the early in your childhood, those early influences, when did you first become interested in rare books?
So I actually came to rare books a little late, which you might not expect. I've always been interested in, like, quote unquote old stuff and art history in general. But I never really put two and two together of books and old until I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Kansas, KU, Rock Chalk Jayhawk. And I did it in linguistics with a particular focus on historical linguistics. And in doing that, I came across a lot of facsimiles of manuscripts in Old and Middle English. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. What's going on with these? And that was really my first spark of old books are cool and how can I do more with them? But it wasn't until my postgraduate work that I actually got to work with real, true rare books. My grandparents were antiques collectors, and so they always sort of had old stuff around, but not very many books. They had books from like their childhood and from their parents. So that only went back to like the 1890s or 1880s. So that was my experience up to that point with old and rare books.
That's actually very heartening, because I think sometimes when you, for many people, even myself, you feel like, oh, I guess I'm too late getting into rare books. I should have been doing this since I was 7.
No, I know when I first graduated high school, I wanted to be a stage costume designer.
Ooh.
So yeah, it took me a while to get around to history as a topic of serious study and further to book history.
I love that. So we talked about you received a bachelor's degree from the University of Kansas, and then you went on to receive 2 degrees in Scotland, which is exciting. So my question is, what led you to pursue graduate studies in Europe, and what opportunities did this international experience afford you in the long run?
Yeah, it was always a dream of mine to live and study in the UK. And so when I started looking for graduate degrees after my undergrad, I was looking for historical linguistics degrees, but none of the colleges I were looking at were quite what I wanted. And then I kind of thought, oh, maybe publishing. And I applied to a couple publishing programs and I got into those, but I wasn't sure. And then the University of Edinburgh popped up when I was sort of casting about for bookish postgrad degrees. And at that time, the program was called Material Culture and the History of the Book. Now they've swapped those two phrases around. So it's book history and material culture.
Okay.
But I thought, oh, what is this? This sounds really, really, really cool. So I applied for that and got in. And it was a very small cohort. There were only 5 people in the program. And it was just fascinating. I think I really benefited from doing my rare book degrees in the UK with such a wealth of collections. America obviously has great special collections, but they're kind of clustered in certain areas, particularly on the East and West Coast and in Chicago. So if you're not in one of those centers, it's really hard to get a feel for rare books as a genre, as a thing, as an object. And because America is relatively new in the sense of country, a lot of their old books are sort of later arrivals. It was interesting to be able to sort of be in the place where these medieval manuscripts were executed, and looking at them in that historic context, and looking at collections that had been in these universities since like the 1400s, like they've been there forever. And especially me being from Kansas, like I kind of had a very short native concept of history of like, well, Kansas didn't exist as a state until the 1860s. And before that, who knows? Because that's what we were taught in school. So that was my background. And so doing my postgrad in the UK really sort of extended my view in a very practical way, because like conceptually, obviously, you know about the Middle Ages, you know about the early modern period and the Renaissance, but to be with the physical objects that embody that, it really makes it real. And that is really what I love to communicate about books, is that they're crystallizations of history that you really only learn about or see in movies, that you can actually hold these things and they were there. They were made in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance or whenever.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I love how you talked about, being in the actual setting and the true context in which they were created. Even if you see one, here, it's a little bit different than actually seeing, being with it in the spot that where it was created. I love that. That's really interesting. Because I guess I imagine it was probably a big adjustment, moving so far away, but it sounds like it was a wonderful decision.
It was. Yeah, I was in my 20s, so I had more sort of rubber in my bones and I could land on my feet. And yeah, it was a really, really, really great experience. It really sent me into colossal student loan debt, but it was worth it.
Exactly. Absolutely. So another question I have, what was it like working in special collections for the Smithsonian Libraries in DC? And we love to hear a few notable experiences. I talk to so many students who say, I want to work for the Smithsonian one day. So can you please tell us, what was it like?
It was amazing. It was really one of the best times of my life. Just the collections are stupendous. Again, it's a context thing. As the Special Collections Reference Librarian, I was based in the Cullman Library in the Natural History Museum. And this was the Cullman Library of Natural History. So you had all of the rare books in the vault, and then you walk out the door and there's the entomology collection, and the birds collection is on this floor, and the minerals collection is over here. And it's incredible to, again, be in that context of science and be at the heart of that really interesting research body. And I also did a lot of work in the Dibner Library in the American History Museum. The Dibner is the history of science. And this is like hard science, chemistry, astronomy, that sort of thing, as well as like history of X-rays. And it's a really interesting mishmash of stuff at the Dibner. It's very exciting. But because I was in such a central sort of library system, I got a lot of opportunities to do really cool stuff. And I think the moment that really stands out to me is we got an email one day from a visiting postdoc up in the birds division. And he said, I'm looking at these color nomenclature guides that you've digitized. And I'm not sure if my computer screen is oriented in the right color sort of balance to make sure that these are actually the correct colors that I'm seeing. Could you bring these books up and let me look at them next to the specimens? And I was like, oh yeah, that is so cool. Because he was trying to unpuzzle early descriptions of, I believe it was a mountain bluebird, which was initially described as a specific kind of blue in a specific color nomenclature guide.
Wow.
And before photography, these color nomenclature guides were the gold standard for describing new species. You would look it up in this book, which had little paint chips next to all of the names. So you would be able to say like, oh, this bird is described as azure blue, not lake blue or something like that. And in some cases, that makes the difference between how species were identified in the past. Things are a little bit different now with taxonomy, but back then that was the case. So this guy was doing research on species and variety divisions in mountain bluebirds. And he had a whole array of bluebird specimens, which were so pretty. Wow. And so I brought him up the nomenclature guides, and he sort of went bird by bird, comparing it to the blue. And it was just like, this is it. This is the coolest thing that one can do as a science librarian. It was amazing.
That is absolutely incredible. Wow. And I didn't know that you worked with those collections. That's yeah, I didn't know that. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, working for the Smithsonian is amazing. The government has great benefits. It is very sort of difficult to crack the federal job system and get into it. And once you're there, especially heritage type government establishments are generally fairly underfunded by federal budgets.
Mhm.
So a lot of people are spread very thin, which, is a blessing and a curse, because we didn't have the budget to hire someone to be my counterpart in the Dibner. I worked in both the Cullman and the Dibner. So it was really amazing to work with both collections, but I was spread pretty thin.
I can only imagine. I noticed that you developed a Rare Books 101 workshop during your tenure as reference librarian at the Smithsonian. So that is fascinating. And can you tell us more about the creation and implementation of that workshop? Because that sounds awesome.
Yeah, so something I noticed when I was at the Smithsonian was a lot of the researchers coming into the reading room were the sort of regular suspects. It was the curators who'd been working there for 40 years, or postdocs or fellows who had very specific rare book interests. And that's great, but it was not really a steady stream of researchers. And we had such amazing collections that I just wanted to shout it from the rooftops and enable people to become more familiar with the fact that the Smithsonian does have a libraries, which was the sort of common remark. The Smithsonian has a library. And B, that it's to be used, that people should come in and use the collections. So Rare Books 101 was a basic sort of rare book handling workshop to get people into the reading rooms and to teach them best handling procedures, how to set up a book in supports, why you don't need white gloves to turn the pages, how to navigate the catalog to find a particular book. It was really focused on getting people's hands on books, because I know it can be really intimidating to go through the locked doors of a reading room and go past the front desk and sign in. And, there's this precious item of extreme cultural importance. And are you sure I'm allowed to touch this? And yes, that's what libraries are for. Please touch the collections. So it was trying to bring in interns and sort of new researchers to feel more comfortable in the special collections setting.
And that makes total sense, considering kind of what you do now, make it such a welcoming environment, or make Rare Books a welcoming place, can be very intimidating to many people, especially if you're kind of new to it. So jumping off of that, I've got a kind of an interesting question. So right now, you work as a rare book cataloger, and unfortunately, there is a common stereotype among people have about catalogers that they prefer to engage with books rather than people. And I think that most librarians and archivists probably feel that way sometimes. I think we all have our days.
Mm-hmm.
But you're doing work that really wouldn't be, I think most people would think a cataloger would do, so much outreach work and making rare books, accessible through means of social media. How cool. But so how does your work as a cataloger inform your outreach work?
So being a cataloger for a rare bookseller is very interesting and somewhat different from being a rare book cataloger for a library. There are a lot of skill overlaps. Obviously, the accurate description of the physical object, collation, making sure that you have identified the illustrations as hand-colored woodcuts, not hand-colored engravings, that sort of thing. But because we're trying to sell these books, there is a huge element of making the book interesting. You can say full calf binding, 280 pages, illustrations, $300. Who would want to buy that? That's nothing. So it's a lot of adding information about the author, or describing why this binding is of particular interest to binding historians, or how this is situated in the history of science, or all sorts of just really interesting ways into these books. Which it's kind of like a little puzzle sometimes, because you're presented with a book that looks fairly boring sometimes. And it's like, well, God, this is $3,000. Why would anybody want to buy this for $3,000? And to, make it worth $3,000.
Right.
So it's really fascinating. And I'd say it has really honed my writing and communication skills, which has been great. I came obviously from academia and then into semi-academic libraries. So my style of writing and communicating was sometimes a bit verbose and a little jargony or a little dry, and so with rare book cataloging for a bookseller, you really want to make these listings accessible to whoever reads them, because the more eyes on them, the more likely you are to sell the book. So it's a really interesting sort of a foot in both worlds of library style cataloging and the communication that I'm so passionate about. And I'm very happy that my bosses at Type Punch Matrix are encouraging of my social media stuff. They've been interviewed for an episode of Bite Size Book History. I run the company Twitter. So they're more than happy to have me screaming about books from all sorts of angles. So it's really interesting. I think that a lot of catalogers in libraries end up there because it is a relatively isolated-ish area of librarianship, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of catalogers, if they want to, can get involved more in, reader services, trying to figure out and engage more in like the statistics of who is researching what. Can we orient cataloging priorities based on use? So I think that there are a lot of ways for library catalogers to sort of be more outgoing if they want to be.
Sure.
But I'm an extrovert, and here we are.
Yeah, that's amazing. And actually, this relates to a question that was put in the chat. You pretty much already answered part of it, asking how do you kind of deal with books that might be kind of a little bit boring. But the other part of the question is, how do you deal with those books that you just don't want to put down? Because I know with cataloging, you're like, okay, I need to get through this amount of books today. But what about that book that you just can't put down?
I'm terrible at that. I mean, I'm not as bad as I could be. I'm very self-critical, but when I talk to my bosses, they're like, it's okay. We all do this. But I do definitely go down rabbit holes sometimes of like, wow, this has so many angles that I could highlight and sort of come at this book from. And do I really need to research the entire history of this and that to write a good catalog record? I don't know. But I think that my cataloging does benefit from that sort of propensity for going down rabbit holes. One of the reasons that Joy Ellen, when she first came in, said, "Oh, how are you?" And I said, "Busy," is because I came in this morning looking at a 2-volume set of books that, they're really interesting in an aesthetic way. They're publisher's cloth bindings from 1860, but they're polka dot, which is amazing. And these are like 3-figure books. I can't imagine they would be over $1,000. But I was like, so what's the history of polka dots? And because I am a research weirdo, I went down this rabbit hole this morning and discovered that the generally attested first occurrence of the phrase polka dot in print, and sort of polka dots as a concept of fabric, everybody says it's 1857 in this particular fashion book, but it's actually 1853 in a different fashion book. And there's no scholarship that says that. So it's like this amazing, weird, cool breakthrough that I did just because I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And like bookselling is just like that. It's really interesting because so many books come through our offices, and, library collections, for all of their wonder, are generally fairly static. You're not buying in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books every year, at least in special collections. that as a bookseller, you're seeing so many books all the time, and you just have to kind of churn through them, that you make these like really wild academic breakthroughs. And it's just like, okay, that's done. Off to the next thing. Like I discovered this fascinating anomaly in the bibliography of Beatrix Potter works that was just plain incorrect, and I ended up correcting. And it's just like these wild sort of canons that you end up accidentally breaking down, not accidentally, but you're cataloging a book, you don't expect to make revisions on the field of Beatrix Potter books. It's
right.
So yeah, I am definitely guilty of getting way too into books, and sort of to offset that, I'll catalog a few low value books just to sort of keep my numbers up.
Exactly. Keep your numbers. I see Camilla over here smiling because we did a little cataloging when Camilla was here, and Camilla loves it. So that is so exciting. Well, I'm glad that you go down rabbit holes too, because I do it. I'm like, oh no, why has it been 4 hours?
Yeah, it's like, oh no, I've spent 4 hours on this thing.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to ask, I think one more question, and then I'm going to see, I want to make sure that the group has a chance to ask questions. So if you want to go ahead and put your question in the chat, please do. Or if you rather ask it on audio, you can just wait. And let me just get through one more question, and then I'll see what the group has. So we're talking about books you catalog. Can you think what was the most, or one of the most challenging books you've ever cataloged?
I've had a few books come across my desk with very, very, very little bibliographic detail in them. That it's just a manuscript or a teacher's book to be used in a classroom with no date. And it's just like, actually, I have it right here, hilariously, because it's being photographed. It is this monster.
Oh.
So like, what is this? This is like marbled boards, like whatever. It's very big, and it is full of numbers. That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Oh my goodness.
1 to 1,000 with a publisher in Karlsruhe, Germany. That's it. No title. It's like, so what is this? And like, why should people care? So again, it's that issue of making these books interesting to particular audiences. And with that one, it says something interesting about the history of education and the development of educational standards in Germany, because it was produced in the 1830s, which is really when these educational standards were spooling up. But of course, there's no date in it. So it's, circa 1830s. But based on aesthetics and based on paper and just sort of general print quality, it's probably 1830s. But yeah, it's just like sometimes you get very bare bones things and you have to do a lot of research to fill in the details. So that's when it can be beneficial to be a rabbit hole person. But you can also end up just spending all day on one book trying to just pull details out of a stone. So it can be difficult to balance research desires and what is actually going on with the book.
Right. And I imagine there's probably not a record in OCLC that you can help. For those who don't know, OCLC is where it's a huge database where librarians can, view and share catalog records. And it's very helpful when there's someone's already seen it. And you can kind of,
or when the book has a title.
That would help.
Yeah.
Exactly. Fascinating. Well, I have a couple more questions, but we may not get to all those. I would like to know, does anyone from the audience have a question for Allie that they'd like to ask? No questions yet? All right, so I'll do one more, and then Allie's going to show us something interesting. She's got from either her collection or maybe something at work, or we'll get to see that. We got a little preview. So I think the last question, the last question I'm going to ask, which I think is great for many of us who are, use social media. How did you learn, I guess, the social media skills or the video skills to be able to create, your bite-sized book history videos to know kind of how to engage people on social media when there's so much information coming at them? How did you learn those skills?
I made it up as I went. And I think sort of there's a meta skill there, which is just being up for trying stuff. I know that a lot of millennials and Gen Z have the reputation of being able to work computers when other generations can struggle. And I really think that it is because we, as this sort of generation, and also Gen X, are just willing to poke at stuff until it does something. Like press the button, go to the settings, like figure out why this thing is not printing, or how to make this text italic, or how to expand this photo, or whatever, to just do stuff until something happens. And my social media was initially sort of a random event of people just started following me because I was posting books, because I was just posting things that I was doing throughout the day. Of, it was a cat and a meal and a book and a really cool coin and dinner and me and my friends and a book. And eventually, like, these posts of books got a lot of engagement and a lot of notes and stuff. And I thought, oh, people like this and they're asking really interesting questions. I'll post more of this. And so it became this really interesting feedback loop for me of post cool book, get cool questions, post another cool book, get even more cool questions. So it was really fun to sort of workshop engaging with people in that way. It's really, like, philosophically, I understand why people like to engage with books the way I post them and the kind of books that I post, but it is very much difficult to replicate. So, like, if you're applying the scientific method to this, I don't think it would work.
Right.
There are too many elements of posting the right thing at the right time, and it's a very strange place, social media. With my video editing, I taught myself all of the skills that I have, and I use free software, and I just base that on YouTube tutorials and written tutorials, and just, again, doing stuff until something happened. And it's not like my bite-sized book history videos are getting like thousands and thousands of views and I'm making YouTube money. And it's like, no, but they are being used by teachers and in classrooms. And like, that's why I made them. So to me, that's success. And I'm glad that that happened, and that they're useful.
That's amazing. So that's encouraging to all of us. I think you don't, kind of learn as you go and teach yourself. That's an okay way to make this happen. I think that's
nobody's an expert right out of the gate. Like, you can't. I'm still learning stuff about books all the time, every day. Like, you can't know everything about books or about social media or about video editing. Like, there's just, it's the depth of knowledge is infinite. So you just kind of make do with what you can and use that to build on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So it's time for show and tell. What do you have for us?
I have a book that looks very plain. You can kind of see that it's blind-tooled. And it has these initials on the back. It is a copy of Bookbinding as a School Subject, which was actually a series of pamphlets put out by Douglas Cockrell who was an English bookbinder in the early 20th century, who was very concerned with teaching bookbinding. He made great progress and really revolutionized the field of book conservation in particular. Of if you're going to rebind a book, rebind it sympathetically. Don't make it like super blingy and weird, and make it out of good material that will last, not very thin leather that will break after, you open the book the first time and there you go, the board's off. But what is particularly interesting about this is that it was bound by a student. So it was someone who read bookbinding as a school subject and said, I will bookbind as a school subject. And so it's like, it's not a very good bookbinding. And I love it. It's very naive. It's very uneven. It's the way they applied the glue made a lot of toning on the spine. And it's just like, this is not a pro. This is not somebody who has been trained in this. It is an enthusiastic amateur. And bookbinding as a school subject also has a section on marbling, which is really cool.
How cool.
And what is even cooler is that I know who BK is. This is Bernard Kay, who was just sort of an enthusiastic amateur artist in Liverpool, who lived in the 20s and 30s, and I think died in the 90s. But it's just like, it's such a cool thing that just feels so lived in.
Yeah.
That, somebody read these pamphlets and put them to use, binding the pamphlets themselves. And there's so much humanity in it, in the sort of uncertainty of the tooling and that it's a little bit uneven. I don't know. I adore it. It is just one of my absolute favorite things.
That's amazing. What an amazing, I don't know. It just feels like such a intimate connection that you don't, maybe the person that isn't right there, but you can feel like, wow, this is your work and this is what you were. Oh, how cool.
I know. Yeah. There are all these like really fun diagrams of how to like make the spine, and how to like attach the boards, and like this is a brayer for the heated tools that you use to actually tool the cover.
That's amazing.
And it's just, I don't know, it's so cool. And there's also this little sample marble paper. But yeah, I adore this thing. I would love to have a binding by Douglas Cockrell, but I don't have 5,000 pounds sitting around.
Right. To pair with that.
I'll do what I can.
Exactly. That is something I've never, those kinds of stories are the things that I think are just the most interesting. And yep, the binding's not perfect, but that's what makes it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing.
It goes back to the I love yucky books thing where like, I love it because it's imperfect.
Right.
If it was, an absolutely fine, unused school book, I wouldn't care about it at all. Like I would not buy that. I wouldn't give it a second glance. But because it has that history and that evidence of use, like that's what makes it special to me. And I think that is a good thing that you can apply to your own interest in books. Like don't feel bad that you like yucky books or that you like romance novels, for example. My boss, Rebecca Romney, recently made this incredible catalog that presented romance novels for really the first time as a subject of academic study. And this was a catalog that we sold. And the books, I think it was a 6-figure sale of like the history of the romance novel in English. And it's something that has generally been looked down upon as lesser or, like, why aren't you reading Dickens? But it's interesting in its own right for its own ways. So if you want to be a collector or a librarian or a researcher, don't let worrying if your topic is cringy or something stop you from being interested.
That's a great piece of advice. And actually, I purchased a signed copy of that catalog because it's amazing, but also because Rebecca includes The Shunning by Beverly Lewis, and I collect Amish romance novels and other. So it's now in my collection because it's included in that. So I'm really glad you included that.
We have an Amish romance novel that I've been putting off cataloging, but I think you've given me the enthusiasm to get to that.
You should email me a picture of it.
Yeah, I will.
Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Allie. This has been amazing. Thank you all so much for attending. And can we please give a round of applause for our guest speaker? Yay. Thank you, Allie. And for those of you who are new to this program, we do this every month. So if you'd like to join, just email rarebooks@kennesaw.edu and I can put you on the listserv. That way you'll know about every month our new topic. But again, Allie, this has been great. Thank you for spending time with us this morning. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. All right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. And I loved all of your questions. And yeah.
Yay, wonderful. Have a great one, everybody. All right, bye.